England, 793 AD. A sacred island, a monastery at Lindisfarne, is about to face a horror from the sea. Monks look up from their prayers to see longships on the horizon, dragon heads carving through the waves. This wasn't just a raid. This was the beginning of an age that would forge a nation in fire and blood. The longships that landed at Lindisfarne carried warriors from Scandinavia, men we now call Vikings. But they weren't just pirates. They were explorers, traders, and settlers driven from their harsh homelands by overpopulation and the lure of riches. Their first raids were brutal and shocking. They targeted the wealthy, undefended monasteries along the coast, plundering gold, holy relics, and people. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a record of the time, described it with terror, the harrowing inroads of heathen men. For the people of Anglo-Saxon England, it seemed like the wrath of God had descended upon them. These early attacks were just hit and run. The Vikings would appear with the summer tides, wreak havoc, and vanish with their loot before any real defense could be mounted. But soon their ambitions grew. They saw a divided land, a patchwork of rival Anglo-Saxon kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria ripe for the taking. In 865, the strategy changed forever. A massive force, known as the Great Heathen Army, arrived. This wasn't a raiding party. It was an invasion force, here to conquer and to stay. Led by the legendary sons of Ragnar, Lothbrok, Ivar, the boneless Halfdan, and Ubba, the Great Heathen Army cut a bloody path through the heart of England. They used fear as a weapon, employing tactics that terrified their opponents. One by one, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fell. Northumbria was first, its capital York captured and renamed Jorvik. Then East Anglia, its king Edmund, martyred for refusing to renounce his faith. Mercia soon followed. By the late 870s, only one kingdom was left standing, Wessex, under the command of a young king named Alfred. Alfred was pushed to the brink of collapse. He was forced into hiding in the marshes of Somerset, a king with no kingdom. But Alfred was different. He didn't just fight. He adapted. And what he did next would not only save his kingdom but define the future of England. If you're enjoying this hidden history, make sure to subscribe for more. From the swamps, Alfred rallied his forces. He built a network of fortified towns called burhs and reformed his army, creating a standing force that could respond quickly to Viking threats. In 878, at the Battle of Edington, Alfred met the Viking leader Guthrum in a decisive clash. Against the odds, Alfred's army won a crushing victory. But instead of simply executing his enemy, Alfred did something remarkable. He made a peace treaty. Guthrum and his men were to accept baptism and rule over a territory in the north and east of England. This area would become known as the Danelaw. This was a turning point. It marked the end of the all-out war for survival and the beginning of a long, complex process of integration. The Danelaw wasn't just a Viking territory. It was a place where two cultures began to merge. Vikings settled down, became farmers and craftsmen. They married local women. Their laws, customs, and language started to blend with those of the Anglo-Saxons. Cities like York, Lincoln, and Derby flourished under Viking rule, becoming major centers of trade and commerce. The Vikings weren't just invaders anymore. They were neighbors. This coexistence wasn't always peaceful. The border between the Danelaw and Anglo-Saxon England was a constant source of friction. Alfred's successors, his son Edward and his brilliant daughter Thelfold, the Lady of the Mercians, spent decades fighting to reclaim the lands of the Danelaw. They continued Alfred's strategy of building burhs, slowly pushing the frontier northward. By the mid-10th century, Alfred's grandson, Æthelstan, had finally succeeded in uniting the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the Danelaw under one ruler. He became the first ever king of England, but the Viking story in Britain was far from over. Just as England seemed united, a new wave of attacks began in the late 10th century. These were different. They were led not by independent chieftains, but by powerful Scandinavian kings with professional armies, like Svein Forkbird of Denmark. England, now a single wealthy kingdom, was a tempting prize. The English king, Thellard the Unready, made a disastrous decision. He tried to buy the Vikings off with a massive tax called the Danegeld. It was a fortune in silver, but it only showed the Vikings how rich England was, and it made them want more. The attacks intensified. In 1013, Svein Forkbird launched a full-scale invasion and conquered the entire country, forcing Thellard into exile. For the first time, a Viking sat on the throne of all England. Sweyn's reign was short, but his son, Canute the Great, would become one of the most successful kings in English history. Canute was a shrewd and ruthless ruler, but he also embraced his role as an English king. He respected the country's laws, protected the church, and brought a period of peace and stability. He ruled over a vast North Sea empire that included Denmark, Norway, and England, proving that a Viking could be more than just a warrior, he could be a statesman. The Viking influence was now woven into the fabric of England itself. You could see it in the landscape. Place names ending in by, like Grimsby or Derby, meant village in Old Norse. Places ending in Thorpe meant outlying farmstead. You could hear it in the language. Words we use every day like sky, leg, skin, husband, window, and even law came directly from the Old Norse spoken by the Vikings. Their legal systems influenced English common law, and their trade routes connected England to a wider world, from Iceland to Constantinople. After Canute's death, his empire crumbled, and the English throne returned to an Anglo-Saxon king, Edward the Confessor. But the Viking connection remained strong. When Edward died without an heir in 1066, it triggered a crisis. The English chose Harold Godwinson as their king, but two others claimed the throne. One was William, Duke of Normandy himself, a descendant of Vikings who had settled in France. The other was a pure Viking claimant, the fearsome Harald Hardrada, king of Norway, one of the most famous warriors of the age. In the autumn of 1066, England faced two invasions at once. Harald Hardrada landed in the north. King Harald, Godwinson force-marched his army 200 miles in 5 days and met the Norwegian king at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The battle was a brutal, bloody affair that ended with a decisive English victory. Hardrada was killed, and his Viking army was annihilated. This battle is often considered the symbolic end of the Viking Age in England. But as Harold's exhausted army celebrated, they received news. William of Normandy had landed on the south coast. Harold had to turn his battered army around and march another 250 miles south to face a new threat at Hastings. The rest, as they say, is history. The Vikings didn't just raid Britain. They settled it, they ruled it, and they became part of it. From the terror of Lindisfarne to the throne of England, their journey was one of transformation, not just for them, but for the nation they helped create. They arrived as heathens and became kings. They came to plunder and stayed to build. The blood of the Vikings flows in the veins of modern Britain, a permanent legacy etched into its language, its laws, and its very identity. Subscribe to uncover more stories history tried to hide.